January 31st, 1944, 3:17 a.m., the North Atlantic, 400 miles west of Ireland. The depth charges exploded like underwater thunder, sending massive geysers of black water erupting into the freezing darkness. On the bridge of HMS Starling, a man who had been awake for 72 consecutive hours gripped the railing with white knuckles, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the churning sea below. Captain Frederick John Walker was hunting. Somewhere beneath those waves, a German U-boat was dying. He could feel it. After 6 years of war, after being rejected, mocked, and passed over by the very institution he had devoted his life to, Walker had developed an almost supernatural sense for the kill. But there was nothing supernatural about it. It was mathematics. It was patience. It was an obsessive understanding of his enemy that bordered on madness. "Contact fading, sir," his Aztec operator called out, voice tight with exhaustion. Walker didn't respond. He was counting the seconds, counting the depth, counting the air supply of the men trapped in that steel coffin below. What the German commander didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Walker had already killed 5 U-boats on this single patrol, and before the sun rose, he would make it 6. But to understand how one man could achieve the impossible, how a rejected officer could become the deadliest submarine hunter in history, we need to go back. Back to a time when Frederick Walker was nothing but a forgotten name on a list of passed-over officers. A man whose revolutionary ideas were dismissed as the fantasies of someone who didn't understand modern naval warfare. They were wrong, all of them, and their mistake would cost Germany the Battle of the Atlantic. If you're fascinated by stories of underdogs who refused to quit, of brilliant minds that were almost silenced by bureaucracy, and of the men who turned the tide of history against impossible odds, then you're going to want to stay for this entire story. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now, because what Captain Walker accomplished in the freezing waters of the Atlantic is one of the most incredible untold stories of World War II. And if this story moves you the way it moved me when I first researched it, smash that like button. It helps more people discover these forgotten heroes. Now let's go back to where it all began. September 3rd, 1939, the day Britain declared war on Germany. Frederick John Walker was 43 years old and his career was effectively over. At least, that's what everyone at the Admiralty believed. He had spent 25 years in the Royal Navy, had dedicated his entire adult life to the service, and had been repeatedly passed over for promotion to captain. The reason? He was too obsessed with one thing: anti-submarine warfare. In the peacetime Navy of the 1930s, submarines were considered a secondary threat. The big battleships, the aircraft carriers, the cruisers, those were what mattered. Those were what got you promoted. But Walker had spent years studying submarines. He had commanded them. He understood how they thought, how they hunted, how they hid. And he had developed tactics to destroy them. The problem was, nobody wanted to listen. "Walker's a fine officer," one admiral reportedly said during a promotion board meeting in 1938. "But he's got this bee in his bonnet about submarines. Bit of a one-trick pony, really. Not the kind of broad experience we need for senior command." Walker received the news of his rejection stoically, as he always did, but those who knew him well could see the pain behind his eyes. His wife, Eileen, watched him read the letter in their small home in Portsmouth, watched him carefully fold it and place it in his desk drawer with all the others. "Perhaps next year," she said softly. Walker shook his head. "There won't be a next year. Not for promotion, anyway. They've made their decision." He paused, looking out the window at the gray English sky. "But they're wrong, Eileen. They're wrong about submarines. And when the war comes, and it will come, they're going to need men who understand the threat." He was right, but he had no idea how right he was, or how catastrophically wrong the Admiralty's complacency would prove to be. When war was declared on September 3rd, 1939, Walker was given a shore posting, a desk job. While younger, less experienced officers were given command of ships, the Navy's foremost anti-submarine expert was assigned to administrative duties in Dover. It was a slap in the face, and everyone knew it. But Walker didn't complain. He didn't lobby for a better position. He simply did his job and waited. Because he knew something that the armchair admirals in London didn't understand yet. The U-boats were coming, and when they came, Britain would need him. The first months of the war seemed to validate the Admiralty's confidence. Yes, there were U-boat attacks, but nothing catastrophic. The convoy system was working. The Germans didn't have enough submarines to make a real difference. And then came 1940. The fall of France changed everything. Suddenly, German U-boats had access to ports on the Atlantic coast: Brest, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire. They no longer had to make the long journey around the British Isles to reach the convoy routes. They could strike quickly, reload, and strike again. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German submarine fleet, called this period the happy time. His U-boat captains were sinking Allied ships faster than they could be replaced. In October 1940 alone, U-boats destroyed 407 tons of Allied shipping. The numbers were staggering, terrifying. Britain was an island nation. Everything, food, fuel, weapons, raw materials, had to come by sea. If the U-boats continued at this rate, Britain would starve. The war would be lost, not on the battlefields of Europe, but in the cold depths of the Atlantic. And still, Frederick Walker sat at his desk in Dover, shuffling papers. But he wasn't idle. Every night, after his official duties were complete, Walker studied. He analyzed every U-boat attack he could find records of. He mapped their patrol patterns. He calculated their diving times, their battery endurance, their maximum depths. He developed new tactics on paper, refined them, and developed them again. One tactic in particular consumed him. He called it the creeping attack. The problem with hunting submarines was simple, but seemingly unsolvable. To detect a submerged U-boat, you needed ASDIC, what the Americans called sonar. The ASDIC operator would send out a ping, and if it bounced off something solid, you knew there was a submarine below. But here was the problem. ASDIC only worked at a distance. As your ship got closer to the submarine, you lost contact. There was a dead zone directly beneath your vessel where the ASDIC couldn't see. So, when you attacked a U-boat, you had to estimate its position, speed, and depth during those final critical seconds when you were blind. You dropped your depth charges and hoped you'd calculated correctly. The U-boat commanders knew about this dead zone. They exploited it ruthlessly. The moment they heard the attacking ship's engines directly overhead, they would turn hard, change depth, and slip away. By the time the depth charges exploded, they were somewhere else entirely. Walker's solution was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of one ship attacking, he would use two. The first ship would maintain ASDIC contact, staying at a distance where it could still see the submarine. The second ship would creep in at minimal speed, so slowly that the submarine's hydrophones couldn't detect its approach. The first ship would direct the second ship by radio, guiding it precisely over the target. The attacking ship would approach at walking pace, engines barely turning, invisible to the submarine's listening equipment, and then, at the exact right moment, it would release its depth charges directly on top of the unsuspecting U-boat. No dead zone, no chance to escape. Walker wrote up his tactics and submitted them to the Admiralty. Months passed. No response. He submitted them again. Still nothing. The creeping attack sat in a filing cabinet somewhere in London while U-boats continued to slaughter merchant ships across the Atlantic. But everything changed in the spring of 1941. The losses had become impossible to ignore. Churchill himself declared that the Battle of the Atlantic was the dominating factor in the war. Everything else, he wrote in a memo, is merely a means to an end. If Britain lost control of the Atlantic, nothing else mattered. Suddenly, the Admiralty needed submarine hunters, real ones, and someone finally remembered Frederick Walker. In March 1941, at the age of 44, Commander Walker was given his first sea command of the war, HMS Stork, a sloop, in command of the 36th Escort Group. It wasn't a glamorous posting. The ships were small, the crews inexperienced, and the equipment outdated. Walker didn't care. He finally had ships. He could finally prove that his tactics worked. But what he found when he arrived at Liverpool to take command was almost worse than having no ships at all. His officers were demoralized. His crews were exhausted. Many had survived multiple sinkings. They had watched friends drown in burning oil, had listened to men screaming in the darkness of the Atlantic night. They believed, with good reason, that the U-boats were invincible. Walker gathered his officers in the wardroom of HMS Stork on his first day of command. They looked at him with barely concealed skepticism. Another shore-based desk officer come to tell them how to fight submarines, they thought. Another man who had never heard a torpedo explode against a hull. Walker studied their faces for a long moment before speaking. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm going to give you a lecture about tactics and procedures, and then I'm going to go back to my cabin and let you get on with the real work." No one responded. A few officers exchanged glances. "That's not how I operate." Walker pulled out a rolled-up chart and spread it on the table. "I've spent the last 3 years thinking about nothing but how to kill U-boats. Every night, every day. I know their capabilities better than their own commanders. I know how they think, how they hunt, how they hide." He looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes. "From now on, we don't just escort convoys. We hunt submarines. We find them, we track them, and we kill them. When a U-boat attacks one of our ships, it has committed suicide. It just doesn't know it yet." Lieutenant Commander David Gretton, one of Walker's new officers, later recalled that moment. "We'd heard a lot of bluster from commanding officers, but there was something different about Walker. He wasn't boasting. He was simply stating what he intended to do, the way another man might state that he intended to have breakfast. But Walker's confidence faced an immediate test. His first convoy escort was a disaster. Not because of Walker's tactics, but because his ships were simply too slow and too few. The U-boats attacked in wolf packs, 5, 6, 7 submarines, striking simultaneously from different directions. Walker's escorts would chase one contact, only to learn that another ship in the convoy had been torpedoed. They spent the entire crossing rushing from one attack to another, always arriving too late. By the time the convoy reached port, they had lost 12 merchant ships. Over 15,000 tons of desperately needed supplies were at the bottom of the Atlantic. Walker was devastated. He sat in his cabin after the convoy docked, staring at the list of lost ships, 12 vessels, dozens of dead sailors. He had promised his men he would kill submarines, and instead he had watched helplessly as the wolf packs tore the convoy apart. "It's not your fault, sir," his first lieutenant said gently. "We don't have enough ships. We don't have enough aircraft. The U-boats have all the advantages." Walker looked up, and his first lieutenant was startled by the intensity in his eyes. "Then we change the equation," Walker said. "We make it so expensive for them to attack that they wish they'd never left port." Over the following months, Walker refined his tactics. He drilled his crews relentlessly. He developed code words and signals that allowed his ships to coordinate attacks without lengthy radio transmissions that the Germans could intercept. He trained his Aztec operators until they could distinguish between a whale, a temperature layer, and a submarine by sound alone. And he began to get results. December 1941. Walker's 36th Escort Group was protecting convoy HG-76, 42 merchant ships sailing from Gibraltar to Liverpool. Intelligence reports indicated a wolf pack of 12 U-boats was gathering to intercept them. 12 submarines against 5 small escort vessels. The mathematics were terrifying. But Walker had prepared something different. His ships weren't just going to defend the convoy, they were going to hunt. On the third night of the crossing, December 17th, the submarine U-131 surfaced to attack. Walker's lookout spotted her in the darkness, and the hunt began. Walker ordered his ships to illuminate the area with star shells, flares that turned night into day. The U-131, caught on the surface, crash dived. But now Walker knew exactly where she was. For 14 hours, Walker and his ships hunted U-131. Again and again, they attacked with depth charges. Again and again, the German commander tried to escape. He twisted, he turned, he dove deep and ran shallow. He tried every trick in the book. It didn't matter. Walker had anticipated every move. At 11:15 a.m. on December 18th, a pattern of depth charges from HMS Blankney finally found its mark. The explosions ruptured U-131's hull. Her crew had no choice but to surface and surrender. It was Walker's first confirmed kill, but it was just the beginning. Over the next 2 days, the battle around convoy HG-76 became one of the most intense submarine actions of the entire war. Walker's small force sank 5 U-boats, an unprecedented achievement. The Wolfpack, which had expected easy pickings, was virtually annihilated. But the victory came at a cost. HMS Audacity, an escort carrier that had been providing air cover for the convoy, was torpedoed and sunk. Walker watched helplessly as the ship went down, taking 73 of her crew with her. For Walker, there was no such thing as victory without grief. Every life lost was a failure, even in the midst of success. When the convoy reached Liverpool, Walker was immediately summoned to the Admiralty. He expected criticism. They had lost a carrier, after all. Instead, he found himself being congratulated by admirals who, just a year ago, had dismissed him as a washed-up has-been. "Remarkable work, Walker," one admiral said, pumping his hand. "Absolutely remarkable. We're promoting you to captain." Walker received the news with characteristic restraint. "Thank you, sir. Now, if I may, I have some recommendations for how we can do even better." The admiral laughed, somewhat nervously. "Always pushing, aren't you, Walker? That's what we like about you." But Walker wasn't joking. The convoy battle had proven his tactics worked. Now he needed more resources to implement them on a larger scale. What he wanted was something unprecedented. Dedicated hunter-killer groups, ships that didn't escort convoys at all, ships whose sole purpose was to seek out and destroy U-boats. Offensive action, not defensive. Take the fight to the enemy. The Admiralty was skeptical. The traditional doctrine said that escort vessels should stay with their convoys. Sending ships to actively hunt submarines was considered wasteful and dangerous. But Walker had numbers to support his argument. In the battle around HG-76, his aggressive tactics had sunk 5 U-boats. A defensive posture would have resulted in far more merchant ships lost and far fewer submarines destroyed. After months of lobbying, Walker got his wish. In early 1943, he was given command of the newly formed 2nd Support Group. 6 ships whose only job was to kill submarines: HMS Starling, Walker's flagship; HMS Wild Goose; HMS Wren; HMS Kite; HMS Woodpecker; HMS Magpie. The names sounded almost whimsical. The reality was anything but. Walker drove his ships and his men with an intensity that bordered on obsession. They drilled constantly. They developed new tactics, new signals, new ways of coordinating attacks. Walker barely slept. His officers worried about his health, but no one dared suggest he slow down. "We're not here to survive the war," Walker told his captains. "We're here to win it. Every U-boat we sink is 100 merchant sailors who will live to see their families again. Every submarine commander we kill is 10 ships that will reach port safely. This isn't just warfare, it's arithmetic." The second support group's first major operation came in February 1943, supporting convoy ON 166 across the Atlantic. Walker's ships were detached from the main escort to hunt any submarines that approached. On the night of February 21st, the group detected a U-boat on the surface. Walker ordered an immediate attack. What followed was a textbook demonstration of the creeping attack. HMS Kite maintained ASDIC contact while HMS Starling crept forward at minimal speed, guided by radio. The U-boat's crew had no idea death was approaching until the depth charges started exploding directly on top of them. U-202 was destroyed with all hands. But Walker's ambitions extended beyond single kills. He wanted to find the wolf packs and wipe them out completely. The opportunity came in June 1943. Intelligence reported a concentration of U-boats in the Bay of Biscay, transiting from their French bases to the Atlantic hunting grounds. Walker took his second support group to intercept. For 3 weeks, Walker's ships prowled the Bay of Biscay. They caught U-boats on the surface, running on their diesel engines to recharge batteries. They detected them submerged and hunted them down. They attacked again and again, relentlessly. The German commanders began to call the Bay of Biscay the Valley of Death. During this patrol, Walker refined another innovation. The creeping attack evolved into the holding attack. Instead of one ship directing and one ship attacking, Walker would use his entire group. 3 or 4 ships would surround the contact, constantly attacking with depth charges, never giving the submarine a moment's peace. They would exhaust the U-boat's batteries, exhaust its crew, and eventually force it to surface or die. The Germans had never faced anything like this coordinated onslaught. Walker returned to Liverpool in July 1943, having sunk 3 U-boats. The Admiralty was ecstatic, but Walker was already thinking about the next patrol and the one after that. "We can do more," he told his wife during a brief visit home. "We can do so much more. If they give me the resources, I can break the U-boat arm entirely." Eileen Walker looked at her husband's gaunt face, the dark circles under his eyes, the hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and caffeine. "You need to rest, Frederick," she said quietly. "I'll rest when we've won," he replied. It was a promise he would keep in the most tragic way possible. The autumn and winter of 1943 saw the second support group constantly at sea. They escorted convoys, hunted submarines, and developed new tactics with every patrol. Walker's reputation grew with each success. The Germans knew his name now. U-boat commanders were warned about the Englishman who never sleeps. Some requested transfers to other patrol areas rather than risk encountering Walker's hunter-killer group. But it was the patrol of January-February 1944 that would cement Walker's legend forever. January 29th, 1944. The second support group put to sea from Liverpool, escorting convoy ON 224 westbound across the Atlantic. Intelligence indicated heavy U-boat activity along the route. Walker briefed his captains before departure. "This isn't going to be like the previous patrols," he said. "The Germans know we're effective. They'll be cautious. But that caution is their weakness. A U-boat that's afraid to attack is a U-boat that isn't fulfilling its mission. Our job is to make them so frightened that they become useless." He paused, looking at the charts spread across the table. "And our job is also to kill them. As many as we can. Let's see if we can set a record." The record would prove more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The first contact came on January 31st, just after midnight. The ASDIC operators on HMS Starling detected a submarine echo approximately 3 miles from the convoy's port flank. Walker immediately ordered the second support group to detach and pursue. What followed was a masterclass in anti-submarine warfare. Walker deployed his ships in a search pattern, 3 vessels sweeping forward while 2 others blocked potential escape routes. The submarine, later identified as U-592, tried to slip away, but Walker's tactics were too sophisticated. For 6 hours, the hunt continued. The U-boat commander, Captain Lieutenant Karl Borm, threw every trick he knew at his pursuers. He ran deep. He released decoys. He made sudden turns and stopped his engines, hoping the hunters would lose contact. Nothing worked. At 7:45 a.m., Walker ordered the final attack. HMS Starling and HMS Wild Goose moved in simultaneously, dropping depth charges in a coordinated pattern that left no escape route. The explosions were enormous, geysers of water reaching heights of 100 feet or more. For long moments, nothing. The sea returned to its normal chop. Walker's officers began to wonder if the submarine had somehow escaped. Then, debris began rising to the surface: oil, paper, equipment, and bodies. U-592 was destroyed with all 49 crew members. Walker recorded the kill in the ship's log with his characteristic precision. U-boat destroyed. Time, 0815. Position, 53 to 40N, 2130W. Method, coordinated creeping attack. There was no celebration. Walker simply ordered the group to return to the convoy and resume patrol positions. There would be more submarines to hunt. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that the patrol had only begun. 3 days later, February 3rd. The second support group was again detached from the convoy to investigate a suspicious radar contact. They found something extraordinary. Not one U-boat, but two sailing together on the surface. This was unusual. U-boats typically operated alone or coordinated their attacks by radio, not by physical proximity. Finding two submarines together was a gift Walker hadn't expected. He didn't hesitate. All ships increased to full speed. Illuminate with star shells on my mark. The night exploded into artificial daylight. The two U-boats, U-734 and U-238, were caught completely off guard. Both vessels crash-dived, but now Walker knew exactly where they were. What followed was a simultaneous hunt against two submarines. Walker divided his forces, 3 ships pursuing U-734, 2 ships pursuing U-238. He coordinated both attacks by radio, switching between tactical situations with a speed and precision that amazed his officers. U-238 was the first to die. Cornered by HMS Kite and HMS Magpie, the submarine was pounded with depth charges until its hull ruptured. Survivors later described the horror inside. Lights failing, water pouring in, the screams of men trapped in flooding compartments. 50 sailors died. U-734 held out longer, but the outcome was never in doubt. Exhausted and running low on battery power, the submarine finally surfaced in a desperate attempt to escape on diesel engines. Walker's ships were waiting. The surface guns opened fire immediately. Shells ripped through U-734's conning tower, killing the captain instantly. The surviving crew abandoned ship seconds before the submarine rolled over and sank. 2 submarines destroyed in a single engagement. Walker's tally for this patrol now stood at 3. But he wasn't satisfied. "Signal from Admiralty, sir," his communications officer reported later that day. "They're asking if we need to return to port for resupply. Apparently, we've used more depth charges than expected." Walker's reply was immediate. "Inform Admiralty that we have sufficient ammunition to continue operations. We are remaining at sea." His officers exchanged worried glances. They had been at sea for nearly a week. Supplies were getting low, the men were exhausted, and Walker himself looked like a ghost, pale, thin, running on coffee and determination. But no one argued. Walker's results spoke for themselves. The 4th submarine came on February 6th. U-762 was detected by ASDIC approximately 10 miles ahead of the convoy's track. Walker theorized that the submarine was positioning itself for a dawn attack on the merchant ships. He decided to prevent that attack permanently. The hunt for U-762 lasted 9 hours. The German commander, Kapitänleutnant Bernd Timm, was experienced and clever. He used every thermal layer, every underwater current, every trick of oceanography to evade his pursuers. Walker countered with patience. He rotated his ships, ensuring fresh crews were always in contact while tired men rested. He predicted Timm's movements with uncanny accuracy, cutting off escape routes before the German even knew they existed. At 4:30 p.m., Walker cornered U-762 against an underwater ridge that limited its maneuvering options. The creeping attack was executed perfectly. "Contact breaking up," the ASDIC operator reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I think we got him." The oil slick that spread across the surface confirmed it. U-762 was destroyed. Kapitänleutnant Timm and his entire crew were lost. 4 submarines in 8 days. It was an astonishing record. The Admiralty sent a congratulatory message. Walker's crew began to believe they were invincible. But Walker knew better. He knew that the U-boats were still out there, still dangerous, still capable of catastrophic surprise. He also knew something his men didn't. He was exhausted beyond any reasonable limit. His hands shook, his vision blurred at the edges. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since leaving Liverpool. But he couldn't stop. Not now, not when they were so close to doing something that had never been done before. February 9th, 1944. The convoy was 3 days from reaching the safety of North American waters. The danger zone was almost behind them. Walker's officers began to relax, to believe the patrol was over. They were wrong. At 2:15 a.m., HMS Wren detected a submarine contact bearing east, moving to intercept the convoy. Walker immediately ordered his group to engage. The target was U-238. Wait, no. U-238 had already been sunk. Walker shook his head, forcing his tired brain to focus. The target was U-0734. No, that wasn't right either. Sir? His first lieutenant looked at him with concern. Walker closed his eyes for a moment, forcing clarity through the fog of exhaustion. The target is a new contact, he said firmly. New submarine, new hunt, all ships to attack positions. The submarine was U-424, commanded by Oberleutnant Zur Seegunter Lüders. It was a relatively new boat on its second patrol, crewed by young men who had heard stories about the deadly English hunter-killer group, but had never faced it directly. They were about to learn why the stories weren't exaggerated. Walker's attack on U-424 was brutal in its efficiency. He gave the submarine no chance to escape, no opportunity to fight back. His ship surrounded the contact and simply pounded it into oblivion. The hunt lasted 4 hours. By 6:30 a.m., U-424 was breaking apart under the pressure of depth charges that seemed to come from every direction simultaneously. 45 men died. Walker recorded the kill with the same precision as all the others. 5 submarines destroyed, 1 patrol, no British ships lost. And still he wouldn't stop. Sir, we need to consider returning to port, his first lieutenant finally said, breaking the unspoken rule against questioning Walker's decisions. The men are at their limit. The ships need maintenance, and frankly, sir, you need rest. Walker looked at his officer with something between appreciation and frustration. I understand your concerns, Lieutenant, but this convoy reaches port in 3 days. We will escort it to safety, and if any more U-boats approach, we will destroy them. His first lieutenant nodded slowly. He had seen that look in Walker's eyes before. There was no point in arguing. February 11th, 2 days from port. The final contact came at 11:00 p.m. HMS Wild Goose reported a submarine echo approximately 5 miles off the convoy's starboard beam. Walker ordered an immediate investigation. The target was U-264, a veteran boat commanded by Captain Lieutenant Hartwig Lux. U-264 had sunk several Allied ships earlier in the war and had evaded numerous hunter-killer attacks. Lux was considered one of the more capable U-boat commanders in the Atlantic. He was about to meet his match. The hunt for U-264 lasted 7 hours. Lux used every technique in his considerable repertoire. He dove deep, dangerously deep, below the submarine's recommended limits. He released decoys, created noise disturbances, and even fired a torpedo at his pursuers in a desperate attempt to break contact. Nothing worked. Walker coordinated the attack with mechanical precision, his exhaustion somehow forgotten in the heat of the chase. He positioned his ships like chess pieces, anticipating every move Lux might make and blocking it before it happened. At 6:00 a.m. on February 12th, HMS Woodpecker began the final creeping attack. Walker directed the approach from HMS Starling, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. 10 degrees starboard, forward, steady, 5 degrees port. The depth charges fell in perfect sequence. The explosions were massive, the concussions felt throughout every ship in the group. And then, slowly, debris began rising to the surface. U-264 was destroyed. Captain Lieutenant Lux and 51 crew members were lost. 6 submarines, 1 patrol, 23 days at sea. It was a record that had never been achieved before and would never be matched for the remainder of the war. Walker recorded the final kill with the same calm notation as all the others. His handwriting, usually precise, wavered slightly from exhaustion. U-boat destroyed. Time, 0615. Position, 48P7 to 20 Copper N, 26 to 18W. Method, creeping attack. 6th submarine destroyed this patrol. When the convoy reached Liverpool on February 14th, Walker was met by a crowd of admirals, officials, and reporters. The story of his patrol had already spread through the Navy. 6 U-boats destroyed. It seemed impossible. It seemed like propaganda. But it was true. Walker was promoted again and awarded a 3rd bar to his Distinguished Service Order. The citation noted his outstanding skill, determination, and leadership in what was described as the most successful anti-submarine patrol of the war. But Walker barely acknowledged the accolades. He was already thinking about the next patrol. We can do more, he told the assembled officials. Give me more ships, more resources, and we can break them completely. The U-boats are vulnerable, we've proven that. Now we need to exploit our advantage. Those who watched him closely were concerned. Walker was a shadow of himself, gaunt, pale, his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to consume him from within. His uniform hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds since the start of the year. His wife Eileen was allowed aboard HMS Starling for a brief reunion. She looked at her husband and had to fight back tears. "Frederick," she whispered, holding his trembling hands, "you're killing yourself." Walker shook his head. "Not yet. Not until we've won. The boys at sea need to know that someone is hunting the hunters. They need to know that the U-boats can be beaten. If I stop now, if I rest, the momentum is lost." "But what good will you be to anyone if you collapse?" Walker smiled, a wan expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I won't collapse. I can't. There's too much work to do." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Eileen Walker understood her husband. She understood that the war had become personal for him, that every merchant sailor who drowned in the Atlantic was a weight on his conscience, and that he would never stop until either the war ended or he did. She kissed him goodbye and watched HMS Starling sail on its next patrol, wondering if she would ever see him again. March 1944. Walker's second support group was at sea constantly, supporting convoys, hunting submarines, maintaining the relentless pressure that was slowly strangling the German U-boat arm. The results spoke for themselves. In the first 5 months of 1944, Walker's group destroyed a total of 15 submarines. The Battle of the Atlantic, which had seemed so perilous in 1942 and early 1943, was being won. But Walker was paying a terrible price. His officers reported that he sometimes didn't recognize them when they first approached. He would stare at charts for hours, muttering calculations under his breath. He forgot to eat, forgot to sleep, forgot everything except the hunt. On one occasion, during a depth charge attack, Walker collapsed on the bridge. His men caught him before he hit the deck and carried him to his cabin. He was unconscious for 2 hours. When he woke, his first words were, "Did we get the submarine?" His first lieutenant hesitated. "No, sir. Contact was lost." Walker was on his feet before anyone could stop him, rushing back to the bridge to resume the hunt. The submarine escaped, one of the very few to do so against Walker's group. Walker never forgave himself for those 2 lost hours. May 1944. The Allies were preparing for the invasion of Normandy. Walker's hunter-killer groups were assigned to patrol the western approaches, ensuring that no U-boats would interfere with the massive troop convoys crossing the Channel. Walker drove himself and his men harder than ever. He knew that the invasion was the turning point of the war, that nothing could be allowed to jeopardize it. His ships patrolled constantly, sometimes going 2 weeks without returning to port. In June, the invasion succeeded. The Allies established a beachhead in Normandy, and the liberation of Europe began. Walker was congratulated personally by Admiral Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches. "You've done more to win this battle than any other single officer," Horton told him. Walker shrugged. "There are still U-boats at sea, sir. The work isn't finished." "It will be finished," Horton replied. "And when it is, you'll be recognized as one of the great captains in Royal Navy history." Walker smiled faintly. "With respect, sir, I'd rather be forgotten and have those boys come home safely." It was July 7th, 1944. Walker had just returned from another patrol. His ships had sunk 2 more submarines, bringing his career total to an astonishing 21 confirmed kills. No other commander in any Allied Navy came close to matching his record. He was given 3 days of shore leave, the first extended rest he had taken in over a year. He planned to spend it with his wife at their small home in Portsmouth. But Walker never made it home. On the morning of July 9th, 1944, Captain Frederick John Walker collapsed in his cabin aboard HMS Starling. His officers found him unconscious on the deck, barely breathing. The doctors diagnosed cerebral thrombosis, a stroke, brought on by years of stress, exhaustion, and the relentless pressure of command. There was nothing they could do. Frederick John Walker died on July 9th, 1944, at the age of 48. He never regained consciousness. The news of his death spread through the Royal Navy like a shockwave. Men who had served under him wept openly. Officers who had once dismissed him as a one-trick pony stood in silence, stunned by the loss. Admiral Horton wrote in Walker's official eulogy, "Captain Walker gave his life as surely as if he had been killed in action. He died for the cause he served, worn out by the relentless pursuit of the enemy." Walker was buried at sea, his body committed to the Atlantic he had fought so hard to protect. His funeral was attended by more admirals than had gathered for any other officer's death in the war. And the men who had served under him, the exhausted, salt-stained sailors of the Second Support Group, stood on the decks of their ships and saluted as their captain's body slipped beneath the waves. "He was the best of us," one officer said afterward. "He saw what no one else could see, he did what no one else could do, and he gave everything he had. Everything." The Second Support Group continued to operate after Walker's death, but something was gone. The driving force, the obsessive pursuit, the belief that no submarine could escape, it had departed with their captain. In the remaining months of the war, the group was competent, professional, and successful, but it was never again what it had been under Walker's command. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. The Battle of the Atlantic, which had killed over 30,000 Allied merchant sailors and 28,000 Royal Navy personnel, was finally over. In the official histories, Captain Frederick John Walker is credited with being personally responsible for the destruction of 21 German submarines, more than any other individual commander in the entire war. His tactics, particularly the creeping attack and the coordinated hunter-killer group strategy, became standard doctrine for anti-submarine warfare and are still studied in naval academies today. But the numbers tell only part of the story. Walker's real legacy was something harder to quantify: the belief that the U-boats could be beaten. In the darkest days of the war, when submarines seemed invincible and Britain stood on the brink of starvation, Walker proved that careful tactics, relentless pursuit, and absolute determination could tip the balance. He trained a generation of officers who carried his methods forward. He developed techniques that remained effective for decades, and he showed that one man, even one dismissed and overlooked by his own institution, could change the course of history. The men who served under Walker remembered him not for his tactics or his kill count, but for his character. He was demanding but never cruel. He expected excellence but never more than he gave himself. He mourned every life lost, Allied or German, while never wavering in his duty. He hated the war, one of his officers wrote after Walker's death. He hated the killing, but he understood that the only way to end the killing was to win. So he gave everything he had to winning, and it consumed him. There's a statue of Walker in Liverpool today, overlooking the waterfront where his ships used to dock. His pose is characteristic, leaning forward, looking out to sea, as if still searching for one more submarine to hunt. Eileen Walker visited that statue only once. She stood before it for a long time, remembering the man who had left her to fight in the freezing Atlantic, who had come home to her in stolen moments between patrols, who had promised her that he would rest when the war was won. He had kept that promise, she realized. He had rested when the war was won. He had just done it in his own way. Back in January 1944, when Walker was 72 hours into the hunt that would make him a legend, when he stood on the bridge of HMS Starling watching the death of the 6th submarine in 3 weeks, one of his officers asked him what kept him going. Walker was silent for a long moment, watching the debris rise to the surface, watching the oil slick spread across the gray Atlantic waves. "I think about the boys on the merchant ships," he finally said. "I think about them waking up at night, wondering if tonight's the night they get torpedoed. I think about their families at home, waiting for letters that might never come." He turned to face his officer, and his eyes, bloodshot, exhausted, burning with something that transcended fatigue, were absolutely clear. "Every submarine we sink is a ship full of those boys who will make it home. Every submarine we sink is a letter that will be written, a family that will stay whole, a man who will see his children grow up." He looked back out at the sea. "So I keep going. I keep hunting. Because as long as there are U-boats out there, there are boys who need me to find them before the U-boats do." The officer didn't know what to say. What could anyone say to that? Walker saved his answer by suddenly snapping back into command mode. "Now then, let's get back to the convoy. There's work to do." There was always work to do, right up until the moment there wasn't. That's the story of Captain Frederick John Walker, the man they mocked for being obsessed with submarines, the officer they passed over for promotion, the commander who became the greatest U-boat killer in history. He didn't do it for glory. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because those boys on the merchant ships needed someone to protect them, and he was the one who knew how. They didn't understand him in the beginning. They called him a one-trick pony, said he was too narrow-minded for senior command. But when the U-boats came, when the shipping lanes ran red with blood and oil, when Britain stood on the edge of defeat, suddenly everyone needed the one-trick pony. And Captain Walker delivered. Delivered until it killed him. Delivered until there was nothing left to give. 6 submarines in one patrol, 21 submarines in total, thousands of lives saved by a man who never stopped hunting. That's not just a war record, that's a legacy. And if you're still watching, if this story has moved you the way it moved me, then you understand why some people deserve to be remembered. Captain Walker gave everything for people he never met. The least we can do is remember his name. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If you want more stories of forgotten heroes and impossible courage, make sure you're subscribed. And I'll see you in the next one. The Atlantic was his battleground. The U-boats were his prey. And in the end, he won. Captain Frederick John Walker, 1896-1944. Never forgotten.